Welcome back to. If you enjoy the story so far, leave a like. That being said, let's get straight into it. And what happens then? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Then you become priority targets for elimination, Captain Stacy said bluntly. Just like your parents were. Gwen reached over and took my hand, squeezing tightly. I could feel her fear, but also her determination not to let that fear control her decisions. So what do we do? She asked. Hide. Pretend we don't care about what's happening to mutants. Let my cousin struggle with uncontrolled abilities while my father loses his mind trying to manage telepathic overload. We get smart, Captain Stacy said. We accept Professor Xavier's help, but we do it carefully. We build connections with people who can protect us, but we don't make ourselves obvious targets. And we gather as much information as we can about who's really behind this conspiracy. You want us to spy on the people trying to kill us? I asked. I want us to survive long enough to stop them. Captain Stacy's voice was grim. Peter, your parents died because they didn't realize how dangerous their research was to certain interests. Professor Xavier is still alive because he's been very careful about who he trusts and how he operates. If we're going to help mutants, we need to learn from both examples. What did Professor Xavier tell you yesterday? I asked Gwen. I mean, after we parted ways. Did you talk to him more about your family's situation? Actually, he called me last night, she said. After I talked to my father about our meeting, Dad asked me to contact him with some questions about security and operational protocols. And what did he tell you? Captain Stacy answered. That his school operates under the protection of several government agencies that aren't aligned with the anti-mutant faction. That his students and their families are provided with new identities and relocation assistance when necessary. And that he's been expecting someone to target him directly for some time now. Expecting how? He's been tracking the pattern of research assassinations just like I have. He knows he's probably next on someone's list, which is why he's been more aggressive lately about recruiting promising students and their families. I thought about Xavier's offer to help Gwen's family, about the community he'd described, about the protections he could provide. It was starting to sound less like an educational opportunity and more like a witness protection program for mutants. Is that why he approached me at the museum? I asked. Because I'm the son of assassinated researchers, and he thinks I might be developing abilities. Partly. But also because he's looking for allies who understand the scope of what we're facing. Captain Stacy studied my face. Peter, can I ask you something directly? Have you experienced any unusual physical symptoms lately? Enhanced strength, improved reflexes, unusual sensory experiences? The question hit me like a bolt of lightning. This was the second time in 2 days that someone had asked me about developing abilities, and I still didn't have a clear answer to give. Sometimes, I said carefully. I've been feeling more energetic lately, like I have better coordination and faster reaction times than I used to. But it might just be psychological, feeling more confident because I have a sense of purpose now. Or it might be genetic activation triggered by stress and emotional development, Captain Stacy said. Peter, your parents' research focused on ways to activate dormant genetic sequences. If they experimented on themselves, if they modified their own genetic material, those changes could have been passed on to you. Are you saying I might be a mutant? I'm saying you might be something new entirely. A next-generation enhancement based on your parents' research, combined with whatever natural genetic potential you inherited from them. The implications of this were staggering. If I was developing abilities based on my parents' research rather than the traditional radioactive spider bite, then my origin story was completely different from any Spider-Man timeline I knew. I could still become a hero, but I wouldn't be the same kind of hero. What would that mean for me practically? I asked. It would mean you're potentially one of the most valuable people alive, Captain Stacy said seriously. If your parents successfully created a method for controlled genetic enhancement, and if that enhancement was passed on to their son, then you represent proof that their research worked. Which would make me a target. Which would make you the ultimate target. Every faction in this conflict would want to control you. The anti-mutant forces would want to eliminate you to prevent replication of your parents' work, and the pro-mutant forces would want to study you to understand how to help others. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. In my previous life, I'd been nobody special, just another software engineer living paycheck to paycheck with no particular talents or significance. Now I was potentially the key to genetic enhancement technology that could change the world, and that made me incredibly dangerous to be around. Gwen, I said, turning to her, maybe you should stay away from me. If I'm really some kind of genetic experiment, being around me could put you and your family in even more danger. Don't you dare, she said fiercely. Don't you dare try to protect me by pushing me away. We're in this together, remember. But if I'm putting you at risk. We're all at risk, Peter. My father is developing telepathic abilities that could expose him at any moment. My cousin is phasing through solid objects uncontrollably. I'm researching mutant rights law while being monitored by federal agencies. The risk doesn't go away just because you're not around. She was right, but that didn't make me feel any better about potentially being the reason she got hurt. What Professor Xavier proposed yesterday, Captain Stacy said, was that we all accept help as a family unit. Gwen and her cousin would receive training and education at his school, I would get telepathic control training from his associate, and you would undergo testing to determine the exact nature of your developing abilities. All of us together. All of us together, with new identities and protective relocation if necessary. We'd become part of his extended community, with all the benefits and responsibilities that entails. It was exactly what Xavier had hinted at during our museum meeting, joining not just a school but a resistance movement, becoming part of a community that protected its members but also called upon them to protect others. What about Uncle Ben and Aunt May? I asked. I can't just disappear from their lives without explanation. Professor Xavier anticipated that concern, Gwen said. He suggested that they could be brought into the community as well, if they're willing. Apparently, he's worked with extended families before. I thought about Ben and May, about their commitment to helping people and their willingness to support me no matter what. They'd already lost Peter's parents to this conflict. How could I ask them to risk their own safety as well? On the other hand, how could I protect them if I was operating in secret? If dangerous people were already watching me, Ben and May were potential targets whether they knew it or not. I need to talk to them, I said finally. They deserve to know what we're dealing with and make their own choice about whether to get involved. Are you sure that's wise? Captain Stacy asked. The more people who know about this, the greater the security risk. Uncle Ben and Aunt May raised me. They've been protecting me and supporting me my entire life. I'm not going to start lying to them now just because the situation is dangerous. Captain Stacy studied my face for a moment, then nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to keep you alive, Peter. Never sacrifice your values for short-term security. It never works in the long run. So what's our timeline? Gwen asked. How quickly do we need to make these decisions? Soon, her father said grimly. The Mutant Registration Act is scheduled for a vote next week. If it passes, the political climate is going to change dramatically and very quickly. Professor Xavier thinks we have maybe 2 weeks before accepting his help becomes much more dangerous and complicated. And if we don't accept his help, then we try to manage on our own, hope that nothing goes wrong, and pray that whoever killed Peter's parents doesn't decide we're worth eliminating as well. The weight of the decision was overwhelming. In 2 weeks, our lives would change irrevocably one way or another. Either we would join Xavier's community and become part of the broader mutant resistance, or we would try to navigate this crisis alone while being monitored by hostile government forces. I want to meet with Professor Xavier again, I said. All of us together this time, including Uncle Ben and Aunt May. I want everyone to hear exactly what he's offering and what it would cost us. That can be arranged, Captain Stacy said. But Peter, you need to understand, once we have that meeting, once we bring your aunt and uncle into this, there's no going back. We'll all be committed to whatever path we choose. I understand, but I'd rather face this crisis with the people I love than try to protect them by keeping them in the dark. Captain Stacy smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since he arrived. You know, I can see why my daughter cares about you. That's exactly the kind of moral clarity this situation requires. Before they left, Captain Stacy pulled me aside for a private word. Peter, there's something else you should know. The federal agent whose memories I accessed, he mentioned that there have been unusual readings detected at several locations around the city. Energy signatures that don't match any known technology or natural phenomena. What kind of readings? The kind that might suggest someone is developing very powerful abilities without realizing it. The kind that might explain why you feel more energetic and coordinated lately. He was suggesting that whatever abilities I was developing were already manifesting in ways that could be detected by government monitoring equipment. The spider bite might not have happened yet, but something was definitely changing in my body. How long do you think I have before these changes become obvious? I asked. Based on the pattern of readings they've been tracking, probably not long. Maybe a few weeks before your abilities become impossible to hide. Another deadline, another ticking clock. By the time the Mutant Registration Act came to a vote, I might already be manifesting abilities that would make me a priority target for whatever forces were hunting enhanced individuals. That evening over dinner, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Uncle Ben, Aunt May, I said, setting down my fork, I need to tell you about some things that have been happening lately. Things that might put all of us in danger if we don't handle them carefully. They both looked at me with expressions of concern mixed with the kind of patient attention that had defined their parenting style for as long as I could remember. What kind of things, Peter? Aunt May asked gently. The kind that involve mutant rights, genetic research, and government conspiracies, I said. The kind that might require us to make some very difficult decisions about our future. Uncle Ben set down his newspaper and gave me his full attention. Are you in some kind of trouble, son? I don't know yet, but I think I might be developing unusual abilities, and I know that people with unusual abilities are being targeted by the same forces that killed my parents. I spent the next hour telling them everything, about Gwen's family, about Professor Xavier, about Captain Stacy's investigation into research assassinations, about the possibility that I was some kind of genetic enhancement experiment. I watched their faces carefully, looking for signs of fear or rejection or disbelief. Instead, I saw the same steady love and support that had defined my entire experience of being Peter Parker. Well, Uncle Ben said when I finished, that's certainly more exciting than I expected when I adopted a 6-year-old boy. Are you scared? I asked. Terrified, Aunt May admitted. But not of you, sweetheart. Never of you. We're scared for you, and we're scared of the people who might want to hurt you. So what do we do? Uncle Ben and Aunt May exchanged one of their silent communication looks. Finally, Ben nodded. We meet with Professor Xavier, he said. We get all the information we can. And then we make whatever decision gives us the best chance of keeping our family together and safe. Even if it means leaving everything behind and starting over. Peter, Aunt May said, reaching across the table to take my hand, we've already lost your parents to this conflict. We're not losing you too, no matter what it takes to protect you. That night, I called Professor Xavier and arranged for a family meeting the following weekend. By then, we would know whether the Mutant Registration Act had passed, and we would need to decide whether to accept his offer of protection and community membership. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about how much my life had changed since waking up in that hospital bed 3 weeks ago. I'd gone from being a lonely software engineer to being Peter Parker, a teenager who might be developing superpowers while falling in love with an amazing girl and preparing to join a resistance movement. The spider bite still hadn't happened, but I was starting to understand that it might not need to. Whatever abilities I was developing, whatever role I was meant to play in this world's future, it was happening according to its own timeline and its own rules. The important thing was that I wasn't facing it alone. I had Gwen, who loved me despite the dangers I represented. I had Ben and May, who were willing to risk everything to keep our family together. And soon, I would have Professor Xavier's community, with all the protection and responsibility that came with it. With great power comes great responsibility. But as I was learning, great responsibility could exist even without great power. And sometimes, the most important power of all was the courage to stand with the people you loved when the world became dangerous. I was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 9, The Vote. The Mutant Registration Act passed by a margin of 63 votes in the House and 8 votes in the Senate. I watched the final tally come in on the television in our living room, with Uncle Ben and Aunt May flanking me on the couch and the weight of history settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. The bill now goes to President McKenna for signature, the news anchor announced. Given his previous statements supporting enhanced oversight of individuals with unusual abilities, passage is considered virtually certain. President McKenna. Not a name I recognized from any X-Men timeline I remembered, which meant this world's political landscape was evolving along its own path toward the same dark destination I'd seen in comics and movies. What happens now? Aunt May asked quietly. Now it becomes a federal crime to possess undocumented enhanced abilities, I said, not taking my eyes off the screen. Mandatory testing, mandatory registration, mandatory monitoring. And that's just the beginning. The news switched to Senator Kelly giving a victory speech from the Capitol steps, surrounded by supporters holding signs that read, "Public safety first," and "No more mutant violence." Today, we take the first step toward ensuring that no American family will live in fear of uncontrolled genetic anomalies, Kelly was saying. The Mutant Registration Act provides a framework for identifying, monitoring, and when necessary, containing individuals whose abilities pose a threat to public safety. I turned off the television in disgust. In 24 hours, possessing undocumented mutant abilities would be a federal offense punishable by indefinite detention. How many young mutants were hiding in their bedrooms right now, terrified of what tomorrow would bring? How many families were making desperate plans to flee the country or disappear into the underground? Peter, Uncle Ben said, you called Professor Xavier yesterday to arrange that meeting. Is he still willing to help us, now that the political situation has changed? I don't know, but I guess we'll find out tonight. Xavier had agreed to meet with our entire family at a neutral location, a small restaurant in Queens that apparently had special significance for mutant-related meetings. According to him, the owner was sympathetic to the cause and could be trusted to provide privacy. 3 hours later, we were sitting in a back booth at Maurizio's Italian restaurant, a family-owned place that had been serving the neighborhood for 40 years. The dining room was nearly empty, and our server, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, had made sure we had complete privacy. Professor Xavier arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a woman I didn't immediately recognize. She was tall and elegant, with auburn hair and green eyes, probably in her mid-30s. When Xavier introduced her as Dr. Jean Grey, I felt a jolt of recognition. Jean Grey, I said, perhaps a bit too eagerly. The therapist who specializes in telepathic development. Among other things, she said with a warm smile, shaking hands with each of us. I also teach biology and genetics at the school, and I help coordinate our family support programs. In most X-Men timelines, Jean Grey was one of the most powerful mutants alive, capable of telepathy and telekinesis that could level city blocks. But here she seemed to be functioning as Xavier's lieutenant and chief therapist, still incredibly important, but in a more supportive role. Thank you both for meeting with us under such difficult circumstances, Uncle Ben said once we'd all settled around the table. Peter has told us about your conversation at the museum, but we'd like to hear directly from you what kind of help you're offering. Before we get to that, Xavier said, I'd like to understand your family's perspective on what happened today in Washington. You mean the vote? Aunt May asked. I mean the systematic criminalization of genetic diversity in America, Xavier replied, his voice careful and controlled. As of midnight tonight, young people like Peter will be required by federal law to submit to genetic testing and report any unusual abilities to government authorities. And if they don't? Ben asked. Then they become criminals subject to indefinite detention in specialized facilities, Jean said quietly. Facilities that, according to our sources, are being constructed right now in remote locations across the country. Concentration camps. They were talking about concentration camps for mutants, just like in the worst X-Men timelines I remembered. How many people are we talking about? I asked. How many mutants are there in the United States? Conservative estimates suggest at least 50,000 individuals with documentable enhanced abilities, Xavier said. But the actual number could be much higher, since many people with minor abilities never realize they're genetically distinct. And how many of those 50,000 do you think will voluntarily register with the government? Aunt May asked. Very few, Jean admitted. Which means that by this time next week, tens of thousands of American citizens will be classified as federal fugitives. The scope of it was staggering. This wasn't just about helping a few young mutants learn to control their abilities, this was about protecting an entire population from systematic persecution. Professor Xavier, I said, when we met before, you talked about belonging to a community that protects its members but also calls on them to help others. How exactly does that work now that helping mutants is essentially a federal crime? Xavier and Jean exchanged a look, the kind of silent communication I'd seen between Ben and May, but with undertones that suggested telepathic connection. Peter, Xavier said carefully, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this table. The safety of hundreds of people depends on absolute secrecy. We all nodded our agreement. My school is not just an educational institution. It's the headquarters for a network of individuals dedicated to protecting mutant rights through any means necessary. Some of our work is legal, advocacy, education, medical research. Some of it is not. What kind of illegal work? Ben asked directly. We help unregistered mutants escape to countries with more tolerant policies. We provide false documentation for families that need to relocate. We gather intelligence on government facilities and operations that target mutants. And when necessary, we intervene directly to prevent harm. Jean leaned forward. What Professor Xavier is describing is essentially a modern underground railroad for mutants. We help people escape persecution, but we also work actively to disrupt the systems that persecute them. That sounds like you're talking about a resistance movement, I said. We are, Xavier confirmed. The question is whether your family is ready to join one. The directness of it was startling. No euphemisms about educational opportunities or family support programs. Xavier was asking us to become part of an organization that would be classified as terrorist by the federal government as of tomorrow morning. What would that mean for us practically? Aunt May asked. It would mean new identities, relocation to a secure facility, and training in whatever skills are most relevant to your abilities and interests, Jean explained. Peter would receive advanced education in genetics and engineering, plus specialized training related to his developing abilities. Ben and May would be given roles suited to their experience and expertise. What kind of roles? Ben asked. You spent 30 years as an engineer, Ben. We have constant need for people who can design and maintain advanced security systems, communication networks, and specialized equipment. May, your background in social work makes you invaluable for helping traumatized families adjust to new circumstances. They'd researched us thoroughly, which was both reassuring and unsettling. But their assessment of Ben and May's potential contributions was accurate and respectful, suggesting they saw us as valuable partners rather than refugees to be protected. And the risks? I asked. Significant, Xavier said bluntly. Federal prosecution if we're caught, potential violence from government forces or anti-mutant extremists, and the psychological stress of living with constant secrecy. This is not a decision to make lightly. But the alternative is trying to hide our abilities while living under an increasingly hostile government that's actively hunting people like us, I pointed out. Exactly. And Peter, your situation is particularly precarious because of your parents' research. You represent living proof that genetic enhancement is possible, which makes you a high-priority target for multiple factions. Uncle Ben was quiet for a long moment, studying Xavier and Jean's faces. Finally, he spoke. Professor, I need to ask you something directly. How long do you think this conflict is going to last? Are we talking about hiding out until political attitudes change, or are we looking at a permanent war between mutants and baseline humans? I wish I could tell you this was temporary, Xavier said sadly. But the forces driving anti-mutant sentiment are deeply rooted in fear, prejudice, and economic interests. This isn't going to be resolved by a single election or policy change. So we're talking about committing to this for years, possibly decades. We're talking about committing to this for as long as it takes to create a world where genetic diversity is celebrated rather than feared, Jean said. For some people, that might be a few years. For others, it might be a lifetime. Aunt May reached over and took my hand. Peter, what do you want to do? It was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. In a few hours, I would legally be required to register with federal authorities and submit to genetic testing. If I refused, I would become a fugitive. If I complied, I would become a potential prisoner in a system designed to control and contain people like me. But more than that, I would be choosing between safety and responsibility. I could try to hide what I was becoming and hope to avoid notice, or I could join a community that was actively working to protect others in similar situations. With great power comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben's words echoed in my mind, but now they carried new weight. If I really was developing abilities based on my parents' research, if I really could make a difference in this conflict, then hiding wasn't just cowardice, it was a betrayal of everyone who needed help. I want to join, I said finally. I want to be part of something that protects people who can't protect themselves. And I want to do it with the people I love. Ben and May exchanged their silent look one more time. Then Ben nodded. Then we're all in, he said. When do we start? Immediately, Xavier said. The registration enforcement begins tomorrow morning, and we have intelligence suggesting that high-priority targets will be arrested within the first week. Peter, based on your genetic profile and your parents' research, you're definitely on that list. How do you know my genetic profile? I asked, suddenly alarmed. Because I've been monitoring the government's target database through unofficial channels, Jean said with a slight smile. One advantage of having telepaths on the team is that we can sometimes access information that wasn't meant for us. What else does the database say about me? Xavier and Jean exchanged another look, and I could see them having a brief telepathic conversation. It says that you're showing unusual energy readings that match theoretical models for enhanced human abilities, Xavier said finally. It also says that your abilities appear to be developing rapidly and may manifest in unpredictable ways. Manifest how? We don't know yet, but according to government sensors, the energy signatures around you have been increasing exponentially over the past 2 weeks. Whatever's happening to you, it's accelerating. As if summoned by his words, I felt a strange tingling sensation in my hands. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but definitely there, like a mild electric current running under my skin. Peter. Gwen's voice came from behind me. I turned to see her and Captain Stacy approaching our table, both looking nervous but determined. I hope we're not too late, Captain Stacy said, addressing Xavier directly. The vote came in faster than expected, and some things have happened that change our timeline considerably. What kind of things? Xavier asked, gesturing for them to sit down. Captain Stacy took a deep breath. 2 hours ago, I was officially relieved of duty pending investigation into my potential genetic status. 3 other officers in my precinct received similar notices. The federal enforcement teams aren't waiting until tomorrow, they're already moving against law enforcement personnel suspected of being mutants. And Gwen? I asked, taking her hand as she sat beside me. I'm officially a person of interest because of my family connections and my research into mutant rights law, she said. We have maybe 12 hours before they come looking for both of us. Xavier nodded grimly. Then we move tonight. Jean, contact the transport team and tell them we need immediate extraction for 7 people. 7? I asked. You, Ben, May, Gwen, Captain Stacy, plus Gwen's cousin Catherine, and one more person we'll be picking up on the way. Who's the 7th person? Dr. Kurt Connors, Xavier said. He's been working on completing your parents' research, and as of this afternoon, he's also been marked for immediate arrest. Dr. Connors, the lizard. In this timeline, he was apparently still trying to finish the genetic enhancement work that had gotten my parents killed, and now he was being hunted by the same forces. Is he willing to come with us? I asked. He doesn't have much choice, Jean said. According to our intelligence, federal agents will be at his laboratory tomorrow morning with a warrant for his arrest and seizure of all his research materials. The tingling in my hands was getting stronger, spreading up my arms in a way that was becoming difficult to ignore. Whatever abilities I was developing, they were responding to the stress and urgency of the situation. Professor Xavier, I said, I think something's happening to me right now. Some kind of physical change. He studied my face intently, and I felt the subtle brush of telepathic contact against my mind. Your body is preparing for significant genetic expression, he said after a moment. The stress of tonight's events is triggering an acceleration of whatever enhancement process has been building in your system. Is that dangerous? It could be, if you don't receive proper guidance and support. Xavier looked around the table at my family. Which means our timeline just became even more compressed. We need to get Peter to a safe, controlled environment before his abilities fully manifest. Aunt May squeezed my other hand. How long do we have? Xavier and Jean had another brief telepathic conference. When they finished, Jean's expression was concerned. Based on what I'm sensing from Peter's bioelectric field, probably no more than 24 hours, she said. Whatever his parents did to their own genetic material, whatever they passed on to him, it's about to become very, very obvious. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too public, too exposed. In less than a day, I would be manifesting abilities that would make me one of the most wanted people in America. My family and friends would be criminals just for associating with me. And somewhere out there, federal agents were already preparing to arrest anyone connected to mutant research or advocacy. So what's the plan? I asked. We finish dinner, pay our bill, and walk out of here like a normal family having a normal evening, Xavier said calmly. Then we get in the vehicles that are waiting outside and drive to a secure location where we can begin your new lives. Just like that. Just like that, Peter. Welcome to the resistance. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, I felt the weight of everything we were giving up, our house, our neighborhood, our normal lives. But I also felt the excitement of everything we were joining, a community of extraordinary people working to protect others like themselves, a mission that would give my developing abilities real purpose and meaning. The spider bite had never happened, but I was about to become Spiderman anyway, or at least, this world's version of a hero dedicated to helping people who couldn't help themselves. With great power comes great responsibility. Tonight, both were about to become very real indeed. Chapter 10, Metamorphosis. The safe house was a converted warehouse in Brooklyn that looked abandoned from the outside but contained sophisticated security systems and comfortable living quarters within. As our small convoy of vehicles pulled into the loading dock, I caught glimpses of other people moving purposefully through the shadows, members of Xavier's network preparing for what was clearly a major relocation operation. How many people are you moving tonight? I asked Xavier as we climbed out of his modified van. 43 individuals and families from the greater New York area, he replied. Tomorrow morning, they'll all be on federal target lists. Tonight is their last chance to disappear quietly. The scale of it was staggering. Xavier's organization wasn't just helping a few students and their families, they were evacuating dozens of people who would otherwise face arrest and detention in the new mutant registration system. Inside the warehouse, I was amazed by the level of organization and preparation. There were stations for document processing, medical evaluation, psychological counseling, and logistics coordination. Families with young children sat in comfortable seating areas while older teenagers helped process paperwork and coordinate supplies. Dr. Connors is waiting for you in the medical evaluation area, Jean told me. Professor Xavier thought you should speak with him before your abilities fully manifest. She led me through the organized chaos to a corner that had been set up as a makeshift laboratory. Dr. Kurt Connors was there, working intently at a computer terminal while monitoring several pieces of sophisticated equipment. When he looked up at our approach, I was struck by how much older and more tired he looked than I'd expected. Peter Parker, he said, standing to shake my hand. His left sleeve was pinned up where his arm should have been, the result of the laboratory accident Captain Stacy had mentioned. You look remarkably like your father at the same age. Dr. Connors. I'm sorry about your circumstances, having to leave your research behind. Actually, I'm not leaving it behind, he said with a slight smile, gesturing at the equipment around him. Professor Xavier's people managed to recover most of my essential data before the federal agents arrived at my laboratory this evening. We'll be able to continue the work at a more secure location. The work on genetic enhancement. The work your parents started, yes. Cross-species genetic therapy designed to help individuals with genetic disorders, including mutants who need better control over their abilities. Connors pulled up a complex diagram on his computer screen. Peter, your parents' research was more advanced than most people realized. They weren't just studying genetic enhancement, they were perfecting it. The diagram showed what looked like a detailed genetic map with areas highlighted in different colors. I didn't understand the technical details, but the overall structure was fascinating in its complexity. What am I looking at? Your genetic profile, based on samples your parents took before their deaths. They documented every modification they made to their own genetic material, and they tracked how those modifications were expressed in their offspring. He was saying that my parents had experimented on themselves, and that I was the result of that experiment. It was both exciting and terrifying. Exciting because it meant my abilities were intentional and controlled rather than accidental, terrifying because it meant I was literally a living experiment. What kind of modifications did they make? Connors switched to a different screen showing what looked like a timeline of genetic changes. Enhanced cellular regeneration, improved neural conductivity, increased physical coordination, and something they called adaptive response enhancement, the ability to develop new capabilities in response to environmental challenges. Adaptive response enhancement. The genetic equivalent of evolution in fast forward. Your body doesn't just heal faster or move better, it adapts to become exactly what's needed for whatever situation you're facing. Connors looked at me seriously. Peter, your parents essentially turned you into humanity's next evolutionary step. The tingling in my hands was getting stronger, and now it was accompanied by a strange sensation in my spine, like electricity was building up in my nervous system. Dr. Connors, I think something's happening right now. He immediately started running scans with the equipment around us. Numbers flashed on multiple screens, and his expression grew increasingly amazed. Remarkable. Your bioelectric field is spiking, your cellular activity is increasing exponentially, and your neural pathways are literally rewiring themselves as I watch. Is it dangerous? Not dangerous, exactly, but definitely intense. Peter, I think your abilities are about to manifest all at once rather than gradually over time. The stress of tonight's events has triggered a complete genetic activation sequence. Xavier appeared at my elbow as if summoned. How long does he have? Maybe an hour before the primary changes begin, Connors said, checking his instruments. 6 to 8 hours for the complete transformation process. Transformation into what? I asked, suddenly very nervous about what I was becoming. We won't know until it happens, Connors admitted. Your parents' research was theoretical, you're the first practical test of their enhancement protocols.